She hid her scent for years, but the Alpha King recognized her soul by a single scar. The kingdom of Veloria lay beneath a silver mist, where the morning sun struggled to pierce through the thick, rolling fog. Castles perched atop jagged cliffs, their towers like silent sentinels watching over the valley below. Whispered tales spoke of kings who could command storms, queens who held the power of life and death, and creatures of the night that haunted the forests beyond the walls. But for Leora, none of the grandeur mattered. Her heart beat with a different kind of fear, the kind that came from years of hiding, of walking unseen among the living, of concealing who she truly was. She moved through the cobblestone streets of the capital city, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. The hood shadowed her face, but it could not hide the tension in her posture. Every glance from a passing stranger made her heart leap. She had learned long ago that even the faintest recognition could bring ruin. Her scar, a thin line across her wrist, was a secret she had protected with her life. It was a map of her past pain, a reminder of betrayal and loss, but also of survival. Leora had not intended to come to Veloria. Fate, or perhaps necessity, had drawn her here. Her brother's letter had arrived under the cover of night, hastily written, begging her to come. Danger was closing in on their family, and only she could stop it. But the capital was no place for someone who wished to remain hidden. The king, Kaelin, was known across the lands as the Alpha King. Fearsome, commanding, yet shrouded in mystery. He could see through lies, through disguises, through the masks that people wore. And she of all people could not afford to be seen. The palace loomed ahead, a towering fortress of black stone, its gates carved with serpentine dragons and runes that glimmered faintly in the mist. Guards patrolled its walls, their armor polished and cruel. Leora paused, letting the sounds of the city fade behind her. She could feel it before she saw it, the presence of Kaelin. There was something magnetic, almost predatory in the way he moved through the court. Tales said he could sense a person's soul with a single glance. Leora shivered, wondering if he could sense hers. She remembered the day she had first received her scar. It had been a mark of betrayal by someone she had trusted completely. The pain had burned like fire, leaving not just a physical wound, but a shadow upon her heart. That scar had become a shield, a secret she wore like armor. She had hidden it for years, fearing the moment anyone might see and recognize her for who she had been, and what she had endured. Leora slipped through the marketplace, weaving between merchants selling glimmering fabrics and fragrant spices. She kept her gaze low, her fingers brushing against the hilt of the dagger she kept hidden beneath her cloak. Every sound seemed amplified, the chatter of the crowd, the clatter of hooves against stone, the whisper of wind through the narrow alleys. And then across the square she saw him, King Kaelin. He was standing near a fountain, the water sparkling beneath the gray sky, and yet nothing in that scene seemed ordinary. His black hair fell across his forehead, eyes like storm clouds, scanning the square with quiet authority. Even from a distance, she felt as if he were looking at her, though she knew he could not know it was her. Her pulse quickened, and she instinctively drew her cloak tighter around her body. But then something happened that made her pause. A flicker of recognition crossed his eyes, subtle and almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. He had seen something that told him she was more than just another visitor to his city. She had always thought her hiding perfect, but perhaps no one could truly conceal a soul that had survived so much. Her first night in the city was restless. Leora found a small inn at the edge of the marketplace, a place with creaking floors and dim lanterns. She took a room that overlooked the mist-covered streets. Sitting by the window, she traced her scar with trembling fingers. Memories came unbidden. The night of betrayal, the endless flight, the years spent moving from village to village, always hiding, always watching. And now she thought she had arrived at the heart of danger and desire, Kaelin's kingdom. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, Kaelin moved like a shadow, observing the court with a keen mind. His advisors whispered rumors, yet he remained silent, his thoughts elsewhere. Something or someone had unsettled him in the marketplace that morning. He could not ignore it, though he tried. The memory of a single fleeting look haunted him, a sense of familiarity he could not name. His instincts, honed by years of rule and battle, told him that this was no ordinary stranger. Days passed, and Leora attempted to carry out her mission unnoticed. She met her brother in secret, discussed plans, and gathered information about those who threatened her family. All the while, Kaelin's presence seemed to linger at the edges of her life. A shadow behind a door, a quiet figure in the corner of a hall, a fleeting glance in the sunlight. She could not see him fully, but she could feel him, like the pull of a tide she could neither resist nor fight. It was during the third night that they truly met, though still under the veil of secrecy. Leora had ventured near the palace gardens to gather herbs for her brother's plan, her movements silent on the damp grass. Kalen was there, as if waiting, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. "You should not be here," he said, his voice low, smooth, yet carrying the weight of command. Leora froze, her heart raced. "I am just passing through," she replied cautiously, keeping her hood over her face. He stepped closer, the moonlight catching the sharp lines of his face. And then he saw it, the edge of the scar at her wrist, peeking from beneath the sleeve of her cloak. His eyes widened ever so slightly. "I know you," he said softly, almost a whisper, though the words felt heavy with destiny. Leora's breath caught. Her hand flew to her wrist, covering the scar as if she could erase the past with her fingers. "You don't know me," she said, voice trembling, but Kalen did. Something deep within him recognized her, not by sight, not by voice, but by the soul that had endured pain, survived betrayal, and yet refused to break. His gaze held hers, searching, questioning, and somehow forgiving. "Run, then," he said finally, his voice gentler now, almost vulnerable. "But know this, I will find you." Leora did not need more. Heart hammering, she turned and ran through the winding paths of the gardens, her cloak whipping behind her. The night air was thick with the scent of roses and dew, but she barely noticed. Every step carried the weight of fear, every breath a mixture of dread and exhilaration. She dared not look back. That night, as she lay hidden in a narrow alley, Leora's mind replayed the encounter. Kalen had seen her, recognized something no one else had. Her heart ached with the thrill and terror of it. For years, she had hidden her scent, her identity, and her soul. And yet, here was a man who could sense her essence with a single glance. She knew then that nothing would ever be the same. The Alpha King of Veloria, feared by many, drawn to her by a bond she could not explain. He would not let her remain hidden forever. And for the first time in years, Leora felt the stirrings of something she thought she had long buried. Hope. But hope, she realized, was dangerous in a kingdom of shadows and power, where recognition could be both a blessing and a curse. She would have to be clever, patient, and cautious. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than she could yet imagine. In the palace, Kalen stood alone in the moonlit hall, staring at the empty gardens where she had vanished. His fingers itched to trace the scar he had glimpsed, to touch what fate had revealed to him. But he restrained himself, knowing that desire without control could destroy everything. Yet even as he turned away, a thought burned in his mind. No one could hide from the soul that had already been recognized. Outside, the city slept, unaware that a thread had been pulled that could unravel the destinies of both a king and a hidden woman. And so, under the silver mist of Veloria, two lives, one hidden, one commanding, were drawn toward each other like shadow to light, like tide to shore, with a single scar as the spark that would ignite a tale of longing, power, and redemption the morning sun filtered weakly through. The clouds over Veloria, casting long shadows over the palace. Its black towers rose like jagged teeth from the mist, and the streets below echoed with the soft clatter of horses' hooves and the chatter of merchants preparing for the day. Leora moved carefully through the city, her cloak still drawn tightly over her shoulders. The encounter in the gardens haunted her. The memory of Kalen's voice, low and certain, calling her without truly knowing her, sent shivers through her. She had thought she was safe in her anonymity, but the Alpha King's recognition was a force she could neither fight nor ignore. She had come to the palace under pretense, a messenger of her brother's family, bringing news and requests. The court was a labyrinth of gilded halls, tapestries that told stories of past kings, and faces that smiled politely but held daggers behind their eyes. Leora moved through it all with careful grace, bowing when required, speaking in soft tones that drew no attention. Yet every step she took felt heavier than the last, because somewhere in these halls, Kalen's gaze lingered. She felt it, though she dared not see him. The palace was alive with intrigue. Nobles whispered of alliances, of plots to undermine the king, of strange happenings in the forests beyond the walls. Magical rumors swirled as well, tales of creatures that shifted in the shadows, of curses that lingered in old stones, and of a king who could perceive truths hidden even from the most cunning of spies. Kalen moved through his court like a shadow of authority. His dark eyes missed nothing, yet his expression often seemed unreadable, as though a storm brewed beneath the surface. He had noticed Leora the first day she entered the city, and that single glimpse of her scar haunted him. It was a mark of pain and survival, a sign of a soul that had endured more than any other he had known. And now she moved through his court, seemingly unaware that the king had already recognized her. He observed her from afar, noting the careful way she held herself, the subtle glances she cast around the room, and the way her fingers brushed her wrist, as if checking the scar that should have remained hidden. He could feel her fear, her caution, and yet something else, something deeper, something that called to him in ways he had never felt before. Leora's days were filled with cautious tasks. She met her brother in secret chambers, exchanged messages with trusted allies, and carefully avoided drawing attention from the more curious courtiers. Yet no matter how careful she was, she could feel Kaelin's presence like a shadow at the edge of her vision. She caught glimpses of him in doorways, in reflections on polished floors, and in the silence of corridors. Each time her heart jumped, a mix of fear and something more she did not wish to name. One evening, a council meeting drew her closer to the king than she had intended. Leora had been summoned to deliver information regarding her family's holdings and the threat that loomed over them. The hall was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows, with banners hanging from towering pillars. Nobles spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting between one another. Kaelin sat at the head of the hall, his presence commanding attention without effort. When Leora entered, the room seemed to hold its breath. She curtsied, keeping her eyes low, and spoke clearly, though her hands trembled slightly beneath her cloak. As she described the dangers facing her family, Kaelin's gaze never wavered from her. It was subtle at first, a narrowing of his eyes, a slight tilt of his head, but she felt it, a weight pressing against her very soul. After the meeting, she withdrew to the gardens, hoping to breathe and collect her thoughts. The night was quiet, the mist curling around the stone paths, soft petals of moonlit roses brushing the cool air. Kaelin appeared without sound, stepping from the shadows like a figure born of the night. "You speak with courage," he said, his voice carrying the authority of the throne yet softened by something almost tender. Leora stiffened. "I speak the truth, your majesty," she replied cautiously, keeping her hood low. "And yet," he said, stepping closer, you hide more than your face, you hide your soul, and yet I feel it." She clenched her fists beneath her cloak. "You do not know me," she said, but even to herself the words felt weak. He studied her, eyes dark and piercing. "I know the scar you hide, I know the pain it carries, and I know the strength it represents. It calls to me." Fear and longing twisted together in her chest. She wanted to run, to vanish into the streets, to hide from the recognition that felt as dangerous as it did irresistible. "Please leave me be," she whispered. Kaelin did not move immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her like one might study a rare and fragile flower. "You cannot hide forever," he said softly. "The soul that bears such pain and courage, it cannot remain unseen." The words were both a threat and a promise. Leora felt her heart hammer in her chest. She had lived her life in the shadows, moving quietly, never letting anyone see her truth. And now, a king, feared, commanding, unyielding, had found her anyway. In the days that followed, their paths crossed again and again. Sometimes by chance, sometimes by circumstance, it became clear that fate was guiding them toward each other. Kaelin's presence was always just at the edge of her vision, and though she tried to avoid it, she felt a pull she could not resist. Leora began to see the palace in a new light. The hallways, once oppressive and unfamiliar, became a maze she navigated with growing awareness. She noticed how Kaelin moved, commanding, precise, yet sometimes burdened by a weight she could not name. She noticed the softness beneath his authority, glimpses of a man who bore more than his crown alone could reveal. One evening, she discovered a quiet chamber at the far end of the palace, filled with books and herbs, a place where light spilled through tall windows. Kaelin was there as if waiting. "You continue to hide," he said, voice low. "And yet I find you." Leora's heart raced. "Why do you seek me?" she asked. "Because I do not ignore what the world tries to hide from me," he replied. His gaze dropped to her wrist where the scar was still concealed. "Because some truths cannot remain buried, not in this life, not in this kingdom." A shiver ran through her. She realized that he spoke not of power nor of politics, but of something deeper, of the bond that recognition had forged between them, of the weight of survival and endurance, of a soul that could not be hidden. Kalen reached out a hand not to touch, but to show trust, patience, and understanding. "You do not need to fear me. I am not your enemy," he said. "But you cannot hide from destiny, not now." For the first time in years, Leora felt an ember of hope. She had lived in fear, in shadows, in silence. And yet here was a man who could see her, who understood without knowing, who acknowledged the scar she thought invisible. And though fear whispered warnings, her heart, against all reason, responded to him. That night, as she returned to her inn, Leora replayed their encounters in her mind. Each word, each glance, each unspoken understanding weighed heavily on her. She realized that hiding had been her life, but recognition could be more dangerous than any sword. The city of Veloria slept beneath a sky heavy with mist and clouds, unaware that in its midst, two lives had begun a slow, cautious dance. A king, commanding and relentless, had found the woman who had hidden her soul for years. And she, for the first time, felt the pull of something she could not name, a connection, a spark, a destiny she could not escape. Yet danger lingered. The palace was a place of secrets, of whispers that cut deeper than steel. Every courtier, every noble, every shadow could hide betrayal. And while Kalen recognized her soul, Leora had learned to trust no one. Her scar was her shield, but the recognition of it could lead to her ruin as easily as it could lead to salvation. In the stillness of the night, both of them pondered the same truth. The world had shifted. Nothing would remain hidden. The pull between them was no longer a chance. It was a current neither could resist. And as the first light of dawn touched the misty towers of Veloria, a silent promise lingered in the air. Their paths were bound, and the dance of masks had only just begun. The wind howled across the cliffs surrounding Veloria, carrying with it the scent of salt and storm. The kingdom, already draped in mist, seemed darker, heavier, as if the world itself held its breath. In the forests beyond the city walls, shadows moved with intent, twisting like living things. Something ancient stirred, something that had waited patiently for the right moment. Leora stood at the edge of the palace gardens, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The scar at her wrist itched under her sleeve, a familiar ache that reminded her she was alive, and that danger was near. She had hoped that by staying close to the city, she could protect her family from the unseen threat that loomed. Yet the closer she came to safety, the more the threat drew near, as if darkness itself had followed her footsteps. Kalen's presence was never far. He moved through the palace like a shadow, unseen yet undeniable. Leora felt him in quiet corridors, in the flicker of torchlight, in the subtle creak of floors behind her. At times she wished she could run, but a strange force, the one she could neither name nor resist, kept her tethered to the palace. It was as if their souls had recognized each other long before their bodies met, a connection she had tried for years to deny. The council gathered one evening in the Hall of Mirrors, a room filled with countless reflections that made it impossible to hide one's intentions. Nobles whispered of unrest in the north, of villagers who vanished, and of strange sightings in the dark woods. Kalen listened without speaking, eyes fixed on the far end of the hall where Leora stood quietly, observing the proceedings. "You see it too, do you not?" whispered a court advisor, leaning close to her. "The unrest, the shadows, something unnatural moves in our lands." Leora nodded subtly. "I have felt it," she admitted. Her voice was calm, yet the truth beneath it was sharp and dangerous. She could feel the pulse of the threat, a heartbeat that mirrored her own. Kalen's voice finally cut through the murmurs. "We will not wait for shadows to decide our fate," he said, his tone commanding, yet carrying an undercurrent of worry that only those closest could sense. "We will face it. Tonight, the forest's edge will see the truth of what haunts us." That evening, Leora prepared to leave with a small group chosen by Kalen. Though he did not speak to her directly, she could sense his gaze in every step she took, in every breath she drew. The journey to the forest was quiet, the paths twisting between gnarled trees that groaned under the weight of the wind. Shadows flickered among the trunks, and the mist clung to their feet, cold and damp. Suddenly, the night exploded with movement. Figures, dark and shifting, emerged from the trees, creatures not entirely human, not entirely beast. Their eyes glimmered like coals, their presence both terrifying and otherworldly. Kalen drew his sword, its blade glinting in the moonlight. He moved with precision, commanding the small group to form a circle around Leora. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and steady. "No harm will come to you." Leora felt her pulse race, fear twisting into a strange mixture of exhilaration and trust. She could sense the danger, yet beneath it, a current of energy linked her to Kaelin. She was not just hiding now, she was alive, fully exposed to a world she had long avoided, and yet strangely anchored by the presence of the king. The creatures advanced, their forms fluid, almost shifting with the mist. Kaelin met them head-on, his movements precise, almost elegant in their power. Leora could feel the tension radiating from him, the energy of a king who bore the weight of his kingdom and the responsibility of her life. Then one of the creatures lunged toward her, a dark blur against the silver mist. Reflexively, she drew her dagger, but her hand faltered. In that instant, Kaelin was at her side, blocking the creature with his sword and sending it sprawling into the mist. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment words were unnecessary. His presence, his protection was enough. After the encounter, when the creatures had retreated as mysteriously as they had appeared, Kaelin led her deeper into the forest, to a hidden glade where the air shimmered with faint, strange light. The clearing was quiet now, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of an owl. "You are brave," Kaelin said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "And yet you carry fear with you. You cannot fight it alone, nor can you hide from it forever." Leora lowered her hood, allowing the moonlight to touch her face. "I have learned to survive in shadows," she admitted, "but sometimes I wonder if surviving is enough." Kaelin studied her, eyes dark and unflinching. "Survival is not enough," he said. "Not when a soul like yours exists for more. Pain can forge strength, but it can also cage you. You must choose whether to remain hidden or to rise." The words struck her, as if he had spoken not to her face, but to her very soul. The scar on her wrist throbbed with the weight of memory, the betrayal, the loss, the years of hiding. She traced it gently, feeling the edge of the pain that had shaped her life. And yet, in that moment, she realized that Kaelin had not come to judge her, nor to condemn. He had come to see, to recognize, and perhaps even to redeem. The journey back to the palace was silent, the mist curling around them, and yet the silence was not empty. Between them, something unspoken hung in the air, a bond neither dared name, yet both could feel. Each glance, each step, each shared breath carried the weight of unacknowledged emotion and a connection that defied logic or reason. Inside the palace, the council awaited news of their encounter. Kaelin reported calmly, speaking of shadows and creatures, of the danger that moved like a living thing in the forest. Leora remained quiet, watching him, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders, the slight strain around his eyes. He bore not just the weight of a king, but the weight of the knowledge that he had recognized her soul when no one else could. Later, alone in her chamber, Leora pressed her palm against the scar on her wrist, thinking of Kaelin. Recognition had changed everything. She had hidden for so long, yet now she realized that some truths could not remain buried, some souls could not remain unseen. The fear she had carried for years was no longer enough to keep her safe. She was alive, and alive in a way that drew attention she could not control. Meanwhile, Kaelin stood on the balcony of his chambers, looking out over the mist-shrouded city. He thought of Leora, of the scar, of the soul he had glimpsed and could not forget. For a king accustomed to command, accustomed to control, there was a strange helplessness in the bond he felt with her. Recognition had awakened something deeper than desire, something like destiny, intertwined with responsibility and the weight of unspoken truths. The night deepened, and Veloria seemed to hold its breath. Shadows moved with intent, whispers of magic and malice flowing through the streets and forests. The creatures had retreated but not vanished, and the palace walls, for all their strength, could not keep darkness from pressing in. Leora knew that her path was now fraught with danger. She could not hide anymore. The king had found her, and with recognition came expectation, protection, and risk. Every step she took would be measured against the pull of destiny and the shadows that lingered at the edges of the kingdom. Yet even in fear, she felt the first stirrings of hope. Kaelin's presence, though overwhelming, was not a threat. It was a promise, a reminder that recognition was not only a danger, but also a chance to reclaim strength, courage, and perhaps even love. As dawn approached, the city of Veloria remained shrouded in mist, its towers black against the pale light of morning. Two lives moved within its walls, drawn together by forces neither fully understood. One bore the crown and the weight of command, the other bore a scar and a history of survival. Both carried secrets, fears, and desires they could not yet name. And in the silence before the first light, both knew one truth. The storm was coming, and neither would face it alone. The sky over Veloria was bruised with the colors of dawn, pale gold bleeding into deep violet, the horizon a promise of change. Mist still curled around the castle towers, but it no longer carried the weight of fear. For some, the world had yet to awaken, but for Leora, the moment was charged with inevitability. She could feel it in her bones. The path she had hidden from for years now stretched wide, impossible to ignore. She stood at the edge of the cliff that overlooked the northern forests, the wind tugging at her cloak. Her scar throbbed lightly beneath her sleeve, a familiar reminder of pain endured and secrets kept. She had faced danger before, but the shadow that lingered in the forest was unlike anything she had felt. It was patient, ancient, and it had been waiting for her. Kalen approached silently, his steps almost imperceptible, yet his presence filled the space like sunlight chasing away darkness. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low but steady, carrying both command and concern. Leora turned to him, meeting his dark eyes. "I have no choice," she said. "It waits for me and I cannot hide any more, not from it, not from you." He nodded, his hand brushing briefly against hers, a gesture of grounding, of solidarity. The connection between them was undeniable now, forged through recognition, danger, and shared understanding. "Then we face it together," he said, and there was no question in his voice, only certainty. They moved toward the forest, the mist curling around their feet like silent watchers. The trees towered overhead, gnarled and twisted, shadows thickening with every step. The creatures Kalen had fought before were gone, replaced by a deeper, older presence. The air was heavy with magic, a scent of earth, decay, and something far older than any living being. Leora tightened her grip on her dagger, though Kalen did not let go of her hand. It was a gesture both protective and reassuring. The forest seemed alive, responding to their approach, and a whispering voice, barely audible, seemed to thread through the trees. "Your courage brought you here," it said, echoing in Leora's mind rather than her ears. "Your pain carved the path, your soul cannot hide." She froze, recognizing the voice as the one that had haunted the shadows in her past, the ancient force that had tracked her, tested her, and now demanded confrontation. She felt her chest tighten with fear, but also with the quiet fire that had carried her through years of survival. Kalen squeezed her hand. "Whatever waits, it cannot harm you while I am here. Trust me," he said. She swallowed, nodding, drawing strength from his presence. The creatures of shadow emerged then, not in the numbers that had attacked before, but as a singular form, shifting and towering, its eyes glowing like embers in the fog. Its presence was heavy with judgment, as though it had seen every choice she had made, every moment of pain, every act of courage. "I have waited for you," it said, voice deep and resonant. "And now you must choose. Will you remain hidden, or will you rise as the soul you were always meant to be?" Leora's mind raced. For years she had hidden. For years she had trusted only herself. But here, in the presence of the force that had tracked her through shadow and mist, and in the presence of Kalen, the king who had recognized her soul, she realized hiding was no longer an option. "I will rise," she said, voice clear, trembling but unwavering. "I will face what comes. I will not hide any more." The shadow paused, as if considering her words, then slowly began to dissipate, the mist curling around it like smoke until it vanished entirely. The forest fell silent, save for the whisper of leaves and the steady beat of their hearts. Leora felt her own breath catch, the weight she had carried for so long lifting in small, almost imperceptible increments. Kalen turned to her, eyes searching hers. "You see. You are stronger than you knew," he said softly, "and not alone, never alone." For the first time in years, Leora allowed herself to believe it. She had been hunted, hidden, and tested, but she had endured, and now recognition had become redemption. Her scar, once a mark of fear and betrayal, was now a symbol of survival, courage, and truth. The journey back to the palace was quiet. The mist had thinned, the first golden rays of dawn touching the black towers. Leora walked beside Kalen, her cloak pulled back just enough to let the sun warm her face. The streets of Veloria were waking, and she realized that life in the open, without shadows, without fear, was a possibility she had almost forgotten. Inside the palace, the court awaited their return. Whispers spread quickly, of creatures confronted, of courage displayed, of the bond between the king and the mysterious woman who had emerged from the shadows. Leora could feel the eyes of nobles upon her, some wary, some admiring, but she held her head high. She was no longer hidden, and she would not shrink back. Kalen did not release her hand once, guiding her through the hallways to a chamber that overlooked the eastern mountains. He gestured toward the sunrise. "Look," he said, "the world continues and so must we." Leora looked, watching the pale gold light chase the last of the mist from the city, and felt something settle deep within her. Years of fear, running and hiding melted like frost in sunlight. She had faced the shadows, faced the creatures, faced her past, and she had survived. More than survived, she had claimed herself. Kaelin watched her quietly, noting the strength in her posture, the calm in her eyes. Recognition had brought them together, yes, but it had also forged something stronger: respect, trust, and perhaps the beginning of a love born from shared endurance. "The scar," he said, finally breaking the silence, "it is not just a mark of pain. It is proof of your survival, and now it is a mark of something greater." Leora traced her wrist gently, feeling the line that had haunted her for so long. "It is a reminder," she said softly, "that the past cannot control the future, and that sometimes the soul must be recognized to find freedom." Kaelin nodded, understanding more in her words than she knew. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers once more, anchoring them together. "Then let us walk forward," he said. "Not as king and stranger, not as hunter and hunted, but as equals, as souls that recognize each other." The city beyond the palace walls seemed brighter now, the shadows receding with the morning light. Leora felt a clarity she had never known, the realization that the dangers she had feared were not only external, but internal. The true battle had been for her courage, her trust, and her willingness to be seen, and she had won. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Kaelin and Leora moved through the palace and city together, their bond deepening with each shared glance, each act of quiet understanding. They faced the remnants of the threat in the forests, confronted court intrigue, and began to reshape Veloria in subtle ways. Leora's courage inspired others who had long hidden their voices, and Kaelin's leadership became tempered with empathy, understanding the strength that came from recognizing another soul. At night, when the palace was silent, they would stand together on the balcony, looking over the misty kingdom. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they simply watched, allowing words to be replaced by the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Their connection, born in recognition and forged in adversity, was no longer a secret, nor was it a danger. It was a foundation. Leora often touched her scar, now a symbol of survival, courage, and the journey she had endured. Kaelin never asked her to hide it, never turned away. Instead, he acknowledged it with quiet reverence, understanding that it was not a mark of weakness, but of strength. A strength that had saved not just herself, but perhaps the kingdom as well. In the palace gardens, where the mist now held the promise of morning rather than fear, they walked together, side by side. Shadows still lingered at the edges of the world, as they always would, but Leora and Kaelin had learned something essential. Recognition and courage were stronger than fear, and bonds forged in adversity could withstand even the darkest of nights. And so, in the golden light of Veloria's dawn, two souls, one scarred, one burdened with a crown, stood together. They had faced the shadows, survived the darkness, and discovered that true strength lay not in hiding, but in being seen. The scar had been the spark, recognition the flame, and now, together, they would walk into a future neither could have imagined alone.